Hello, welcome to the latest version of Last Bell Boxing. The title on this show tells you everything you need to know. Tommy Morrison, the Duke story. What a career, what a man, what a fighter. From heartbreak of not making the Olympics to WBO heavyweight champion of the world, the prize that everybody wants. From movie superstar to ending a career much too short. It's an absolute pleasure to be joined by Tommy's ex-wife, Trisha. Trisha, tell me a little bit about the man that you knew.
Yeah, he's a great man. Actually, I'm the widow of Tommy Morrison.
Apologies.
No,
You are
no,
Tommy's still wife and widow.
yeah.
Slip of the tongue there. I do apologise.
No problem. There are 2 ex-wives as well, but I am the widow. The Tommy Morrison that I knew was someone that was initially very depressed, had been kicked out of boxing, had no career, no boxing career anymore, was not accepted back into the movie world, but was just such a sweetheart with a big heart. And for those of you that have met him in person, you'll know what I'm talking about. He would give his shirt off his back to anybody. He would give his last dollar to anybody in need. That the real Tommy Morrison is the Tommy Morrison that I knew, not the Tommy Morrison with the millions of dollars and the fame and fortune. I met the real Tommy Morrison.
You met Tommy when his career had finished, right? And he'd gone through some real dark times. We'll come into that very shortly. I'm looking at all this memorabilia behind you. See if you can move the camera about for me. There's some fantastic stuff there. This is Tommy's room, I'm guessing.
This is Tommy's corner. This is where I kind of do my interviews. You've got a little bit of Rocky V there. You've got some of his posters, and then you've got, obviously he was a big Elvis fan. You've got TCB and some of his other memorabilia. But yeah, there is a Tommy room where I keep all his belts and brochures and photos, all his memories. Yeah.
You know, Trisha, the more I've looked into this and done prep for this interview, the more I shake my head at everything that's gone off. There's lots of stuff that people don't know. The thing that often happens is people see mainstream media news and they take it as fact. And I'm hoping that today you're going to open that up a little bit and make people realize that wasn't the man. A lot of them things didn't happen. And the real big one, obviously, is the HIV test that put him out of boxing in the first place. We'll do a timeline on that very shortly, but so much false, fake news, so many lies, so much, let's call it corruption. Yeah, I'm hoping that you can open the door to me a little bit on this today. Before we do that, the nickname the Duke. Now, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to look a bit of a fool if I get this wrong, aren't I? It's my understanding that Tommy got that from a relative, a very famous relative. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. Marion Morrison was John Wayne, and Tommy allegedly is the great-grandnephew of John Wayne. Yeah. And that's how he was dubbed the Duke.
Okay, so that was kind of given to him by who? Do you know?
Well, it was actually put together by his PR people, but when they started to dig up some of his genealogy, it turned out that Marion Morrison, which obviously is John Wayne, known as the Duke, that they started to use Tommy the Duke Morrison, because he was John Wayne's great-grand-nephew.
Okay. There's going to be lots of people that watch this that know all about Tommy, know all about his career, but there'll also be a lot of people that are younger generation that may not have ever seen Tommy fight, perhaps don't know so much about his boxing exploits, and they might know a bit more about the stuff afterwards. So what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is go back and revisit some of Tommy's career. And I'd like to go right the way back to his amateur days. So Tommy was a Golden Gloves champion. This was in 1988, I believe, Golden Gloves champion, and then went on to fight in the eliminator, the trials for the Olympics, where he come up against Ray Mercer for the first time.
Yes.
And that's where heartbreak happened, because Tommy lost that on a split decision, I believe. Yes. And Ray Mercer actually went on to win the Olympics win the gold at the Olympics and the Seoul Olympics that time round. Has Tommy ever did he ever express to you what he was going through at that time?
He was, at the very beginning when I met Tommy, he was really not interested in boxing anymore. It still hurt him because of what had happened and what had kicked him out of boxing. So it took a while. And in fact, just showing you some of the memorabilia, when we moved into a house in Tennessee, we emptied out his storage, and he had a whole bunch of memorabilia, but he didn't want to display it. And I said, come on, let's do a man cave. Let's get those pieces out there. Let's put them around, and then you can start to think about that and talk about it. And, not to the general public, just talk to me, because I'm not from the boxing world. I come from the tennis world and Wimbledon, and boxing to me was never my sport. So it kind of gave him a little bit more confidence to start talking about boxing, because he knew that I wouldn't ridicule him like he had been ridiculed in the media. So we started to put the pieces up on the wall and posters, and so bit by bit, he would talk to me a little bit about his fights and about some of his opponents. I didn't even know what sparring meant. So he really had to educate me on sparring and 10 rounds and the squared circle. It was like, this is a different language. But I started to make notes, because I just thought it was really important that he needed to remember about his background, where he came from. So based on the amateur stuff that you started talking about, he told me that at the age of 7, that's when he started to box, and he started to box on his front porch. And, he kept on telling me, everybody tells me that they taught me how to do my left hook, Trisha, but I was the one that taught myself how to do that left hook. And so he would come out with these little stories, and his amateur record, which I wrote down, was 290 and 21. And out of 290, he had 263 knockouts. That was his amateur record, right? And he started at the age of 7. So you mentioned at the age of 18, yes, he won the Kansas City Golden Gloves. He won the Western Olympic trials. He won the PAL championships, and he lost that split decision to Ray Mercer. So as he was talking about it, I started to write these statistics down, because nobody out there, especially the new people on the block now, the kids growing up, they're not going to get that information from anyone, because nobody took the time really to solidify his record. But yeah, that was his amateur record. And then he went on to tough men contests after that.
He did. And then later on, I believe at the end of 88, he turns pro.
So what happens is that between the age of 7 and 13 is when he did all the amateur boxing stuff, okay? And then between the ages of 13 and 18, that's an important timeline, that's when he did the tough men contests. and you have to be 21 and over to do the Tough Men contest. So I guess his mother forged his birth certificate. He also changed his name for some of the fights. And so he ended up with a Tough Man record of 50-1. So he lost one Tough Man contest. And the reason why he went into Tough Man contest was to earn money so that he could help support his family, his parents and his brother and his sister. So what was really funny was that one that he lost to actually made contact with us on Facebook when we ended up going on Facebook in 2010. And he looked at me and he said, I don't know whether I should respond to that message or not. I wasn't legally allowed to be fighting him. I said, go ahead, go respond. You lost to him anyway. So he ended up having a conversation with this one guy who I need to find out the name of that one person. But then, so after he did that, he did the Tough Man contest between the ages of 13 and 18, and he retired from Tough Man contests at the age of 18, and then started to finish off his amateur boxing with the Golden Gloves. And then you're right, at the age of 19, he went and did his professional boxing. Yeah.
It must have been very difficult knowing that you lost on a split decision, not ending up going to the Olympics and then seeing the person that beat you become gold medalist. I mean, that does one or two things to people. It either sinks them in the shell or it pushes them forward to become better. Tommy clearly was the second, because he goes on at the end of 88, start of 89 on a 19 fight win record, 15 KOs, blowing people away for fun. And then at the end of that little run, at the end of 89, there's a certain person watching him in the crowd, looking for a co-star in a gigantic film, and obviously I'm talking about Sylvester Stallone there. What has Tommy told you about that whole process of how did that all come about in getting the part in Rocky V?
Yeah. In fact, the very first thing that he gave me when we met, and I'll just pull it out. He said, Trisha, you'll probably want one of these. And I said, why? And he said, well, that's me and Sly in Rocky V. And I said, well, who's Sly? And he said, well, it's that guy there that I'm next to. And I said, well, what's Rocky V? So he just thought that was hilarious because honestly, I never watched Rocky V. And I never watched any of the Rocky movies. I didn't know who Sly was. My life was a total different world. I was up in ski resorts with 80 inhabitants there. I was on the Italian Riviera doing tourism that none of Hollywood and boxing and Sly and Rocky was even ever part of my life. So he had to sit me down. Probably the only person he'd ever met that had never heard of Sly or Rocky V. And so it was more exciting to him to talk to me about how he got into this movie that I'd never watched. And in fact, he wanted to watch Rocky V with me, but we never had a copy of the Rocky V movie. And when we went to Blockbuster, which is like a movie rental place out here in America, they didn't have Rocky V in there, so he had to order it, and we still didn't watch it up until he died. I watched it for the first time 2 or 3 years after he had died, and it all started to make sense to me. His daily language that he would use would be stuff out of the movie, because he said to me that he was acting himself in the movie. He was Tommy Gunn at home, and he was Tommy Gunn in the movie. So yeah, so he told me about Bill Caton, who was his co-manager, and it was Bill Caton that put together all the film of Tommy boxing to send it to Sly. And Frank Stallone, who's Sly's brother, was the one that actually pitched it to Sly and said, hey, here you have a real boxer. You just need to teach him how to act, as opposed to getting an actor and teaching him how to box. You know, you've got Tommy that perhaps can do it all. And so that's how he got his role in Tommy Gunn. But up until then, he had always been a fan, he said, of Sylvester Stallone.
I mean, what an absolute legendary fight saga. I grew up as a huge fan of Rocky as a child, and I think anybody that has had any interest in boxing have either wanted to be the heavyweight champion of the world or Rocky. So
Yeah.
the fact that Tommy got to do both, I mean, wow.
Yeah.
He must have been, when he got to that point where he could talk to you about that sort of stuff, he must have been really proud of that.
I think he was proud of it in the end, although the whole fame and fortune thing got just taken in the vape, within just a second. His whole life just became nothing. And so I think by doing his man cave and putting up all the photos and memorabilia, started to bring up the good parts of his life. He did tell me that the fight that they came down to film for the Rocky V movie, that he had never boxed so bad. Out of all his career, that up until then, it was distracting having the film crew there. And then you've got Sly walking in, trying to put the robe on and trying to feed him with water. He said he just hated all that because he was not doing very well actually boxing as they filmed him, that he just felt that was all a distraction. And he was very, very nervous, he said, extremely nervous. You've got to think about that. He was 19, 20. And here he is in the middle of a ring with his hero, Sly.
It's something that's mind blowing. I'm guessing it must have gone like the blink of an eye when he was filming it. Did he ever mention to you how the perception changed of him as a fighter potentially, or as a star after that film came out?
Yeah, he did. In fact, he wrote about it. One of the things that we did was, as he started to talk about it, I gave him a handheld recorder. And I said, start remembering stuff. You need to start writing about it because somebody's going to want to know about, the story of your life one day. And so he started, what we used to do, we would sit on the sofa. He would start talking about boxing and movies and a little bit of his career. And I would start typing it up. And then at the end of the day, I would print it off and he'd proofread it. He'd choose the photos to go with it. So, yeah, he got really involved in it, with his memory and everything. He remembered every single fight, everything that he remembered in the ring, everything he remembered out of the ring for each of his fights. It was impressive. And it's a book that he brought out called My Boxing Career. And he outlines every single fight. And he also mentions the Hollywood Rocky part of his life in there as well. Yeah. So it did change his life being in that Rocky movie, you're right. And it took him away from training for some of his fights, but he got back into it after that.
I was going to say that it must have been a distraction because he's getting, I mean, he's starting to get attention anyway. You don't go 19 fights with 15 knockouts without getting attention in the boxing world. Yeah. He then takes obviously a period of time. I think it was 6 months out for the filming of the fight of Rocky V. Sorry.
Yeah.
When he comes back, he then goes 7 straight fights, 7 straight knockouts, and gets his first opportunity in 1991 at the WBO heavyweight title against the infamous Ray Mercer. I mean, did he has he ever mention to you about Ray Mercer becoming a bit of a thorn in his side?
Yeah, it's funny because I got to meet Ray Mercer. I've actually met Ray twice, well, two, three times. And again, Tommy trying to educate me on boxing. He had me sit and watch every single VCR tape that he had of every single fight. And one day I put in the fight for him against Ray Mercer. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, great. The first 3 rounds are looking good. And then it's like total destruction. And it's absolutely brutal. And I look around to him and Tommy's fast asleep while I'm watching this fight on this little portable TV. And I wake him. I said, what are you doing sleeping out? How can you let me watch this horrible fight? I said, this is disgusting. And he said, yeah. He said, I said, why aren't you watching this with me? And he opened his eyes and he closed them. He said, because I know how it ended, Trisha. And it was not a good ending. And yeah, he writes about it in his book. And we were at the Hall of Fame one year in Canastota, and we sat at a table next to somebody that was a friend of that ref in that fight, in the Mercer fight. And the ref was called Ref Perez. And this gentleman that we were sitting next to said, Tommy, I'm really sorry. Ref Perez was a friend of mine. And he explained to me that during that fight, during those unanswered, brutal knockouts, I think is what you call them, Ref Perez froze. He couldn't move. Mentally and physically, he couldn't move to get Ray Mercer off of Tommy. And it is one of the most brutal knockouts, I think, in the history of boxing. And Tommy said, yeah, that he could have put me in a pine box, is how he replied back. But it's funny because they got to meet up again when Tommy opened up his TCB gym in Wichita, Kansas, in the poorest neighborhood. Tommy invited Ray Mercer to come over. And so we went to pick Ray up at the airport. And so you've got Tommy getting out of a little Volkswagen Beetle, going up to meet Ray Mercer, and they're hugging each other. So the first thing I see of Ray Mercer is Ray knocking everything out of Tommy's head. And then the next vision of these two is them hugging each other at the airport. And then I get them into my car, which was a little Volkswagen yellow Beetle, and they start laughing and giggling and talking about the fight. And then Ray got really upset as to how much Tommy earned for the fight. And those two just were like brothers. Yeah. So
that's the brutalness and the beauty of boxing.
Yeah.
You can get that where it's such a brutal fight, such a brutal knockout, and then years later they can be best mates.
Yeah, that's right.
That's something that makes me still love the sport. Fighters can do that and be so respectful to each other. It's such an amazing thing. When you think about it, it makes no sense. The fact that they can beat each other up and then still come out and be like you just said, laughing and joking. It's crazy, really. But
now I'm not a boxer, but I've noticed watching all the weigh-ins and the face-offs that they used to do in the 90s were much more civilized than what they're doing today. They're actually asking to be punched in the face as they're looking at the camera and swearing at each other. Well, that never happened in Tommy's days. No. He had good face-offs with Ray, and Donald Trump was there, right? He had a good face-off with George Foreman. All his opposition, it seems to be more civilized, I guess, than what it is today.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And you would think that a brutal knockout like that would do something mentally to a fighter, not Tommy.
Yeah.
Tommy then goes. He then goes 8 consecutive KOs again, which puts him right back in the picture for the WBO title fight, which he got against one of the absolute legends of the sport in George Foreman.
Yeah.
Tommy comes through that fight, changes his game plan a little bit, because he knows what Foreman brings to a fight, and that was very smart of him to come out of that fight the way he did. That's got to be something he's very proud of, sharing the ring with George Foreman.
Oh, he absolutely adored George, and he learned a lot from George. And in fact, he used to boast that he and George had a conversation before the fight, well before the fight. In fact, it was after the Mercer fight. And I think George felt that he shouldn't have lost that fight against Ray. And I think one of the questions that Tommy asked George, as you get older, how do you train? And so George kind of gave him a few tips on how to train as you get older. And so Tommy used those tips against George when he fought and beat George. Yeah.
Tommy obviously lifts the WBO title then, which no one can ever take away from him. It's in my opinion, it's still the biggest prize in all the sports. It should be held as the biggest prize in all the sports. It has been for hundreds of years. That's got to be the pinnacle of any fighters wanting is to be the heavyweight champion of the world. He then goes on to have a number of years fighting some world-class fighters, beating world-class fighters, and he was in with the likes of James Quick Tillis, Hinkland Thomas, and of course we've just talked about George. He then gets to the point with in the mid-90s where he's offered a huge contract with the infamous promoter Don King. That's when things start to take a bit of a turn. And then in 1996, Tommy's allegedly diagnosed with HIV, which stops his career dead. And HIV and AIDS in the 90s was a disease that people didn't understand. Everyone was scared of it. And he was treated, correct me if I'm wrong, he was treated like a leper. Kicked out of the sport. No one wanted to know. What has he told you about those times?
Yeah, you're right. And when we met, we actually unofficially met in 1996 in Las Vegas. That was the fight that never happened for him. And I was based in Las Vegas. I was actually dealing with a lot of the British tourists coming over into Vegas and handling accommodations and sightseeing tours. And I'll never forget it because that particular weekend, they didn't have enough rooms for the tourists to come over and stay in. And then suddenly there were all these rooms because the fight was cancelled. So I never really forgave Tommy Morrison for that 1 week of lost revenue in tourism. So the story always stuck. It just stuck in my brain for all those years until I actually met him in 2009 in the middle of the USA in Wichita, Kansas. And I couldn't believe it was the same Tommy Morrison. And before the guests arrived at my hotel, it was a beautiful historic hotel, I would always check to see who they were so that we would give them either the best room or accommodate them somehow. And I thought, oh no, this is the Tommy Morrison that ruined tourism for me. Do I give him the worst room in the hotel or do I give him the best room in the hotel? And especially after Googling, because yes, they treated him like a leper for all those years, even up until the point where I met him in 2009. That's a long time. You know, when you think about what we've been through over the last 4 years, where people were not allowed to get within 6 feet of each other, you know, couldn't breathe the same air, they were isolated, you know, with everything that had been going on in the last 4 years now, that's how he was treated forever, for every single day of his life from 1996 onwards. And he was in deep depression. And yes, he told me about it. I had questions just like you're asking me. How did it happen? Who told you? Where's the evidence for it? And he started to open up because nobody up until that point had ever been interested in listening to him, listening to his side of the story. And we'd literally just sit there of an evening and I'd come up with a question and I'd go, well, where's the test result? Well, what was the name of the physician that told you you had HIV? And what test did they use? And what did Don King do? You know, and when was the contract signed between you and Don King? And over and over and over. So yeah, it was a big conversation.
I can imagine. Did Tommy accept in 1996 when this all came about? Did Tommy accept it as fact at the time?
Yes, he did. Remember, he was just 26, 27 years old.
Yeah.
So you're told that you've got the deadliest virus in the world and that you have to get your house in order, as they said, house in order, and you're probably going to die before you get to your car. So, of course, why would he not take it seriously? And so he did. He took it seriously. And then from that point on, things changed for him.
So that time period between 1996 and him meeting you in 2009, surely it's gone through his head. Hold on a minute. If I've got this deadly virus, why am I not poorly? Why am I not sick? Why am I not? Is the same thing happening to me that's happened to all the other people that have contracted this disease over the years?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, in his book that he writes, I think you'll remember this is a huge photo that everybody has seen where he's standing at a podium after Vegas and he's telling the world, he on his ode is telling the world that he's definitely got the virus. Well, how was he told? Well, it's the same guy that told him that he had the virus in Vegas. Okay, well, where's the physician standing next to you, Tommy, at the podium, like Magic Johnson? There's a physician standing next to Magic Johnson at his press conference. Where's your physician? Well, he's not there. Okay, well, Tommy, where's the test result for that press conference? All right, so you were told in Vegas you had HIV. You've got no test result. You've got no physician's name that told you. And then you get flown out of Vegas to Tulsa. You get put in front of the film crew, the press again, at a podium. You're told again that you've got the virus, but there's no physician there. There's no test result. And you're scripted to say, you know, don't look at me as a role model. I failed. I've lived a promiscuous lifestyle. He's only 26, right? He just turned 27. And he supposedly has lived this promiscuous lifestyle. You know, so in his book, he writes, it's puzzling. I've never felt more healthy in my life. Never had any symptoms whatsoever. I haven't been sick in years. I don't feel sick. I don't look sick. It's puzzling. And he basically said that he was told to say what he had to say on the podium. And so, yeah, that's how it went down.
In your opinion, and I can only go by your opinion, I mean, we're going to go on to facts very shortly about this whole situation. And you're going to open the eyes of a lot of people when you bring out these facts. But in your opinion, at that point in 1996, why did they do this to Tommy?
It's in my opinion, what's really interesting is that all the facts have still not come out to the public. So let me give you an example of one of the facts that I've pulled out. This is the first contract with Don King. It's a multi-million-dollar contract with Don King. And it's a promise to fight Mike Tyson in the third fight. And I have the contract right here. And it's a multi-million-dollar contract. And it's worth over 35 point whatever million, which was a lot of money in 1996 as well as it is today.
It's still a lot of money.
And it is a court exhibit, by the way, so people can pull it up for themselves.
Right.
It's Exhibit Z, the Don King Tommy Morrison contract, and I filed it with the court on December 30th, 2020. And in there it tells you that he'll get 10 million for fighting Mike Tyson. Then there's a rematch, another 10 million. Then there's another additional 15 million for this, and whatever. So it was worth a lot of money. But what a lot of the people don't realize is that fight in 1996, in February 10th, 1996, was the first fight of this multi-million-dollar contract that Tommy had signed with Don King. This was just Tommy and Don King. Tommy was his own manager. He was his own person because he had fired his manager, John Brown, about 6 months to a year before this Don King fight. What people don't understand is that fight that got cancelled was against somebody called Arthur Stormy Weathers.
Yep.
And in court records, it shows that they had told, Arthur Stormy Weathers had told Don King that he was never going to be able to fight on February 10th, 1996, because he had sinus issues. And he'd got a little script from the doctor, which again is in court records, saying that it's not safe for Arthur Stormy Weathers to fight on February 10th, 1996. He wouldn't be able to fight for at least another 2-3 weeks. And yet they carry on and do the weigh-in of that fight. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm not even a boxer, and I'm not a promoter, and I'm not a manager. But if you've been told that your opponent can't fight and you've got a letter from the physician, then why are you at a weigh-in the night before and then boom, the next day Tommy's the one that's removed from the fight? So to me, that is still something that I find very, very weird. But in my opinion, only because I had spoken with Tommy, is Tommy said he would have beaten Mike Tyson. And he would have beaten him in 1996 because Mike Tyson was just coming out of prison and there would be ring rust on him. And he knew for a couple, 2-3 reasons why he would beat him. I can't tell you the other 2 reasons, but I know I can tell you that Tommy had a plan in the ring of how he would beat Mike Tyson. So whether they wanted that to happen or not, well, obviously it didn't happen.
Wow. Staggering, isn't it?
Yeah.
That obviously, the whole situation sends Tommy into a spiral. And as you've mentioned, he goes into a deep depression and starts taking drugs. And he starts taking drugs with people that he would probably never associate with. I'm guessing a lot of people are giving him in just because he's Tommy Morrison. They want to hang around with someone of his stature. You then obviously you meet him in, as you've just said, 2009. What sort of state is Tommy in when you first meet him and you start getting to know him?
So when I first meet him in 2009, he's on drugs and drugs, drinking, depression, and homeless. He didn't have a home. He lived out of his car. And this is 2009. And, what makes me sad is to this day, I still see people saying that they were his best friend. Why would I have met Tommy in 2009 in this state if he really had all these best friends out there? You have to wonder about that. And he had nothing to live for. And I was not on drugs, and I've never done drugs. I don't drink. Well, I don't drink a lot. I have the odd glass of wine, but I don't do drugs. I don't drink. I'm not from the boxing world, and I tend to see if somebody has a good side to them, that I will fight for them. They're the underdog, and they deserve to be treated like a human being and not like a leper, like you had mentioned. And so, getting to know him was amazing. What he had been through all those years, and to this day, people still talk about, well, if he had just not been on drugs and drink and a womanizer, he would have gone far. Well, wait a minute. We've just said he's had 290 amateur fights, 50 tough men fights, 51 3-1 professional fights. What are you talking about? He did go far, and then he got stopped. He wasn't on drugs and drink and womanizing then. Look at the timeline again. You get kicked out of boxing, which was your whole world. Then what are you going to do? You're going to turn to drugs. You're going to turn to drink. You're going to turn to hanging out with people that you shouldn't be hanging out with, that just want to see this heavyweight person and patrol them around, all doped out of their head. That's what he was going through. And so I started to tell him there's more to live for, and boxing isn't everything. And obviously, Rocky wasn't part of my life. So, there's other stuff that you can get involved in. And, when you've had enough drugs and you start to realize that you're sick and tired of being sick and tired of drugs, which is exactly how he said it. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of drugs. Then he started to want to do drug rehab and change. And that's what we worked on.
Am I right in thinking, correct me if I'm wrong with this timeline, but am I right in thinking that there's a 2-year time period between 2009 and 3-year time period? No, 2-year time period. Between 2009 and 2011, where Tommy does go into rehab, gets himself clean. And then there's a misdemeanor unpaid fine. Tommy finds himself in jail. And while he's in there, he gets an insect bite that creates a bit of a problem. Now, at that point, you then visit his doctor. I've actually watched an interview with his doctor, and questions are asked to him about Tommy's condition and about did Tommy have HIV? Did he look like he got HIV? And this doctor was absolutely categorically no. He was an healthy man. And he talked about the insect bite and the fact that it got infected. Tell me a little bit about what happens from there on.
Yeah, that whole situation was actually the start of the downfall of Tommy Morrison. And it happened in September of 2011. And again, it's something that the mainstream media have not let the fans know about. But it was a horrible situation. The doctor that you talk about, his name was Dr. Ossio, and a proper doctor. He's not a conspiracy theorist. He's actually retired now, but his name was Dr. Ossio. And when Tommy was thrown into jail, he was thrown into jail under a felony fugitive warrant of arrest. and it was a sealed felony fugitive warrant of arrest. And this was in Sevierville, Tennessee in 2011. And I couldn't get the warrant unsealed to find out what this was all about until 30 days after he had been in jail in Tennessee and then got extradited to Wichita, Kansas, where it was unsealed. The unsealing of it was, in the end, turned out to be an $80 unpaid fine from South Dakota. And when I called the police after I had the warrant unsealed, I called the police and I said, "Why did you do a fugitive felony warrant of arrest on him?" And they said, "We didn't." I said, "But here it's stating that there's an $80 unpaid fine." He said, "Yeah, there's an $80 unpaid fine, but we didn't send out a warrant for his arrest." And so I said, "So if I pay that $80 fine now," and this is 2011 and it went back to 2001, "would that be the end of it?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay." So I just sent the payment to them. That was the end of that. So they actually had to dismiss that whole case. But 30 days of jail in a small cell where it took over a week to get a Bible into him because he had wanted a Bible, and then to come out with an insect bite to his chest was the beginning of the downfall for a bogus felony fugitive warrant of arrest. He came out with, and I took pictures of everything, of this on his chest, and Dr. Ossio drained it, and he sent us back to Tennessee after I had bailed Tommy out of jail. And he sent us back to Tennessee saying, "You probably need surgery on there." And he wrote a letter specifically stating, "Please be advised that Tommy Morrison was seen in my office on September 29th, 2011. He had a large abscess to his right axilla, which was the result of an insect bite, probably a spider, that had occurred a few days prior to his visit on the 29th. It was necessary to drain the abscess at that time. If you require any additional information, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Antonio L. Ossio, MD." So that was the beginning of Tommy's downfall.
So Tommy then goes, and I believe he then goes and has an operation. Is that right?
Yeah.
And an operation that should have only been a kind of a minor operation. Tell me a little bit about what went wrong there.
So we go back to Tennessee after this horrific prison sentence, and we schedule a surgery with a Tennessee surgeon. And the first thing the surgeon says to Tommy is, "Oh, I know you. You're in denial. You know, you've got HIV, and you got diagnosed with HIV in Vegas." And Tommy and I look at each other and go, "You know, where's this come from?" And anyway, so we blow it off, and the surgeon does the surgery on Tommy's chest. And it was supposed to be a 1-hour surgery, you're right. We, in fact, parked the car in a 2-hour parking spot right outside the hospital, and it was an outpatient surgery. So we expected to have the surgery done on his chest for where the insect bite was, come out, get in the car, go back home. This never happened. The surgery took, I think, just under 8 hours. And then Tommy was admitted into the hospital, and we didn't get out of the hospital for 8 days, and he was a completely different person.
Wow.
I drive home with him after he had been discharged, and basically they sent him home to die, is what they were kind of suggesting. And we had the home health lady come the next day to change the bandage on his chest. And in fact, I'm going to reenact what she did. This is a real photo of Tommy's chest. And there was a 4x4 piece of gauze on the side of his chest that all she was told to do was just remove that and put on a clean piece of gauze. So that's all there was to it. So Tommy sat on the stool in the kitchen. I was there. There was a friend of his there who happens to be a scientist who was there, and the home health nurse. And so she took this off and she was about to put the clean one on. And I said, wait, there's something sticking out of his chest. You know, there's just a piece of fluff, a piece of hair. I said, there's something in his chest. And she said, well, no, this is all I've got to do. I said, look, there is something in his chest. So I took a photograph as his of his chest, and that is what's called a flat tongue, right? So showing without having to point actually on with your finger, that was what was in his chest. And I said, there's something in his chest. And she said, no, I can't see it. I took another photo of it, enlarged it. I said, there's something in his chest. So she said, okay, let me look. So she pulled on that little piece of thread and she kept pulling. And Tommy was sitting on the stool. And this is obviously not the same gauze that was pulled out, but this is how wide it is. That's the size of my hand. That's how wide it is. And she kept pulling and pulling and pulling. And out comes 12 foot of surgical gauze from Tommy's chest that she didn't know anything about, we didn't know anything about, had not been documented, and Tommy's just there. No anesthetic, no pain pills. So if you think the Ray Mercer fight was bad, this was bad. And out comes 12 foot of surgical gauze, covered in blood clots, smelt really bad, and the home health nurse fell onto the sofa, and we had to take care of her, and Tommy was in a huge amount of pain. He was crying, and he locked himself in the bathroom, and eventually we got him out, and the home health nurse, she took the gauze and she left. And so I called the surgeon as this was happening, and I said, what have you done? You know, you've just left all this gauze in my husband's chest and the nurse didn't know anything about it. How long were you going to be leaving it in there for? And he said, oh, I'm so sorry. You know, I didn't realize. And that was the end of it. And we didn't go back to the hospital that day. We ended up going back the next few days because that night, after she had pulled the gauze out, I mean, that's his chest. The surgeon had taken out major and minor pec muscle, and you know, it was empty. You know, it should have been empty, but this is the whole hand you could fit in there. But that's what it should have looked like when she just had to change the gauze. But that night, Tommy being Tommy, you know, he felt strong up until he walked to the bedroom and his right leg gave way. It's almost like he had a stroke, and his head went straight through a wall into the sheetrock of the wall, the plaster of the wall, and he fell down on his neck. And that was the start of the real downfall, because about 6 months later, we found out that he had actually paralyzed half his voice box, which meant that everything that he was trying to eat and drink went straight through into his lungs, because his voice box was not opening and closing properly. So that was the downfall. And of course, the mainstream media didn't report on that. And in fact, there's one scene in a particular documentary that ESPN brought out where the guy that told Tommy he had HIV in Vegas in 1996, that totally destroyed his whole life, is questioning my part in that documentary, where I'm trying to tell what happened and making me out to look like a real fool. Yeah, this is all documented in the court of law, and this really did happen. And that was the beginning of the downfall for Tommy, which led us to be in hospital for the next 21 months, in and out of ICU. And he fought septic shock and septicemia because of the gauze that had been left in his chest. His actual chest healed up from the inside out, but his blood had been poisoned by the septic, septicemia, by the gauze.
Wow. That's just unbelievable. Did you never get an explanation from the surgeon?
They had, in fact, I got an actual written report from the nurse, and I did take it further. I contacted the Tennessee Medical Advisory Board. I reported the surgeon, and his name is Dr. Schuchman II. And I've recently read reviews about him, and apparently he's not a great guy. And I reported him, and they lost the paperwork. And then I had to report him again and put all the paperwork together. And then they turned around to me and said I was out of time. That was it. What happened, happened.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, as you've just said, that was the downward spiral of the end of Tommy's life. He passes away September 2013, and then you get a postmortem.
Yeah.
And in the postmortem, there's no sign, no trace, no evidence that Tommy ever had HIV.
Correct. Yes. And
you must have either, if you were stood up, fell over. If not, if you were sat down, fell off your stool, because you'd known all along that this wasn't the case. But now you've got actual proof.
Yeah.
This is the start of this is 2013. We're now in 2024. It's 11 years of you fighting courts, Nevada commissions, doctors, getting proof on your own, like a one-person crusade to bring the truth out for Tommy, really. Where did that? What? I don't even know where to begin on this. Tell me where you went from that point, because there must have been lots of questions, right?
Yeah. I think that what you have to realize is that the relationship that Tommy and I had was private. We were not in the media. I was not like wife number one or wife number two, where I'd be in the middle of the ring, hugging and kissing him and being part of the fame and the fortune. Our lives were more private. And so I didn't know really what to expect. I just knew that I had not given up on him during his drugs rehab situation, during his jail time. You can't give up on somebody. And I swore that I would never give up on him. And I also swore that I would continue his fight for him, because there was still a lot of unanswered questions. And I needed to get the answers to those questions for him, but also for me, but also for the fans. Like there's still a lot of very loyal fans out there that wanted to know what happened, what went on. And then when Tommy wrote this, it was the last thing that he actually could write on a heart-shaped piece of wood. Don't give up on me, my love, right? You don't. You promise to find out exactly what happened. So I did. I turned and I promised to him, this was my deathbed promise to him. And I said, I'm going to get the answers for you. We're going to find out what happened, who, and also whether you have HIV or not. And I'm talking to him, and he's already dead, and I'm saying this. And so the hospital staff said, do I want an autopsy? And I said, absolutely. I said, I want a blood autopsy, because I just have a feeling that September 1, 2013 is the date of his death. September 2, 2013, the media are going to go crazy. They're going to go crazy saying, oh, Tommy was diagnosed with HIV on February 10th, 1996. And of course, how does he die? There's only one way he could die, and that would be by AIDS on September 1, 2013. Well, if it's not true, I wanted the people to know that no, he did not have HIV. So I told the hospital staff, I said, let's do an autopsy, blood autopsy. We've already done other stuff prior to this. We've already ruled out that he did not have any AIDS-defining diseases. And I've got all that back up here, and we can only go on so long in an interview here, but I've got all the backup here and the doctors' names. They found no AIDS diseases in Tommy, in his blood, in his lungs, in his sperm, in his sputum, in his cerebral spine fluid. And I've got the names of all the physicians. These are all court records. So you've got no AIDS diseases. Then a year before he dies, his blood was also sent to Boston, Massachusetts General Hospital while Tommy was alive to see if he had HIV, the virus, which is called a retrovirus in scientific terms. They turned it around. They took photographs of his blood. They did an extensive pathology report. They found no HIV. So you've got the antemortem showing no HIV. You've got the tests showing no AIDS diseases. And these are not done by conspiracy theorist physicians. They're done by experts in the field of virology and microbiology that just spend their time doing viruses. So my next thing is I had to look at it as like a business. I said, okay, now I want the postmortem. And if you say you found the virus, I want you to put that on the death certificate. And I want you to say that Tommy Morrison died of HIV. But if you did not find the virus, then it's not on here. And quite rightly, you don't have to list HIV down on a death certificate if you don't want to. But I specifically said I want it listed on here if he has HIV. And they said, okay. So they drew his blood and they did a postmortem. And I was sitting down on a recliner when the phone call came in. And it was September 17th, 2013, which is over 2 weeks after Tommy had died. And the physician, the infectious disease physician, called me and he said, Mrs. Morrison? And I go, yeah. And he stuttered. And he's not a physician that stutters. Negative. No HIV.
All that time. I mean, what are you thinking at that point? Are you thinking, finally, I have some proof, or are you thinking they've destroyed his life and now he's not here to say I told you so?
Well, he knew all along, really, that he was clear, he was clean. And we both kind of knew that all along, that he was clear, he was clean. The physicians that he had attended, they also knew that. It's getting it across to the media that's the issue, right? It's the media that the ones out there that are diagnosing Tommy. It's not the physicians. And so I said, immediately, I need that in writing, because they're going to want to see that in writing. It's not going to be good coming out of my mouth. I am not a physician. I did not draw the blood. I did not analyze it. I did not diagnose it. I did not sign the pathology report. I need it to come from you. And so they did. They sent it. And here it is. And it is written in scientific terms, and it's got their methodology, exactly the methods that they used, and it says final diagnosis. So the final diagnosis is no abnormality, no retroviral budding is present, and retrovirus would be an HIV virus if it was there. So no retrovirus budding, no retroviral inclusions, no viral particles were seen. And they photo imaged his blood. It got signed off in the proper manner by the Code of Federal Regulations. It was all properly done, and it's filed in the court of law. And the media have not reported on it, and didn't report on it until now recently.
So that should have been the end of it.
Yeah.
2013, that should have been the end of it. That should have been, it should have been across all of the pages. We got it wrong. And some sort of apology. Not that any of it would have done anything, but some sort of justice.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case, because you still had to fight. And there's still people today reporting that Tommy died of HIV.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what happened was, okay, so now I have got definite confirmation, because I've got all the test results showing no AIDS. I've got the test results showing no HIV, and they're done by proper people. They're not done by ESPN. They're not done by Don King or another promoter or a manager or a trainer or a mother or a brother or a father or a cousin. They're done by people actually in the trade of viruses. So I then decide to contact Nevada, and I contact the Nevada Athletic Commission based on all the information I had, and I go, okay, so now I need answers for my husband, Tommy Morrison, who diagnosed Tommy with HIV that kicked him out of boxing. And I got no reply from the Nevada Commission. So I went to the test kit company, and they told me, well, we don't diagnose anyway. We just make the tests, and you can test false positive or positive, but we don't diagnose. And so then I went to the lab in Vegas, and I said, you know, my husband's postmortem shows that he had no HIV, no AIDS diseases, nothing. Who diagnosed him in your lab with HIV? So I got no answer. So in the end, I had to file a lawsuit to get my answers.
And what was the outcome of that? When, that was in 2014?
Yes.
What was the outcome of that lawsuit?
The outcome of the lawsuit was nobody diagnosed Tommy with HIV in Vegas. Nobody. The outcome of that lawsuit is that the lab produced a lab report. If you remember, I kept on asking Tommy, where's the lab report? And so the lab produced it for the first time in 2014, so almost 20 years later. And this lab report, it's not the test results. They would have had to provide a test result showing Tommy's reaction, blood reaction to the actual test, but then they've never provided one of these, not to this day. And they provided a test lab report with the incorrect physician on there, with the name of a physician that's never been accepted by the medical board there. It has Tommy is 99 years old. Nobody has even signed off on this lab report. And it said that the blood was held in a freezer, which is impossible because you can't freeze the blood to test for HIV. It has to be warm temperature. So that's the evidence of his HIV, which is no evidence of HIV.
Wow. So it beggars belief that a world of boxing that works in millions and millions and millions of pounds, and they've got a superstar that's just signed a contract for tens of millions, that he gets told he's HIV positive, and then all these years later, you find out that there was never a positive test in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And in fact,
I'm staggered that that this has not become a massive story, because in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, this is the biggest scandal in boxing history.
Yes, it is.
And no one's reporting it.
Right.
None of the mainstream media have gone near it. Why is there not? I know we're going to come on to this in a minute, that you're running you're currently doing a documentary, in Tommy's words, about his life and about everything that's gone off. Hopefully, and that comes out next year. Am I right?
Yes, 2025. Yes, next year.
So I'm hoping that actually opens the eyes to all the so-called mainstream media, that all this time, I don't know, is it embarrassment? They don't want to admit that they've been wrong all these years, or I don't know, is there something more going on? I don't want this interview to turn into a conspiracy theory. I want it to be facts, and you've reported facts. Am I right? Am I right in saying that in 2020 the Nevada Commission denied ever suspending Tommy?
Yes. Yes, you're right. Yeah, in court records, they actually came out and said that they never suspended Tommy. And in fact, in court records in 2006, July of 2006, the Nevada Commission actually filed a court document where it said that Fight Facts had taken him off the suspension list. So basically, Tommy on paper was suspended for 10 years during his prime. Remember, he got kicked out just 26, 27 years old. And then at the age of 37, the Nevada Commission is telling Fight Facts, oh, take him off the suspension list based on those medicals, is how they did it.
But you didn't find out till Tommy had passed. 2014,
that's right.
You found out that they'd done that in 2006.
Yes, that's right. And Tommy didn't even know that. He did not know that his suspension got lifted. And in fact, I would say 99% of the people listening today don't even know about that document. That his suspension got lifted in July of 2006, and they changed his status to not suspended but denied. His license was denied. Okay, so my question then to the commission was, okay, so you've produced this, you've now said that you never suspended Tommy, which in a way is correct because you lifted it 10 years later. But why did you deny his license then? And so they said, after not being able to prove that he had a virus throughout the whole lawsuit, they said, well, we denied his license because he failed to abide by one of the rules, the licensing rules. And I said, okay, which licensing rule did he not abide by? And they said NAC
in 1996.
Yes.
When they first suspended him. So they're now saying, after all this time, that the suspension was because he violated a rule.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what rule was that?
Okay. So after now throughout this lawsuit saying, well, we didn't diagnose Tommy with HIV. We have no proof of HIV as a diagnosis, but he failed this rule on licensing. So the rule, I said, well, what rule was that? And they said NAC 467.027, Section 3. And I go, okay, all right, well, fair enough. And I said, well, what did that rule require? And they said, well, it required that you had to provide proof that you didn't have HIV. And I said, but you've already said that you had no proof that he had HIV now, yet you're saying that he violated that rule in 1996. So I spent like a week after they put that in court records, and I sat down in Tommy's room and I said, Tommy, you know, they said you violated a rule. And I kept talking to Tommy, and I said, Tommy, I don't understand it. And they've not mentioned it once that you violated it. They've mentioned it over 300 times, because I went through every single document. He violated NAC 467.027 section 3. And I kept looking at it. And I don't know, somehow he must have given me some kind of word, but he said, look up that rule. So I had to look it up by contacting the legislator. And I contacted the legislator, and I'm running out of time in court because I had to give a reply. And I requested NAC 467.02 section 3. And they sent it to me, and it's stamped, and it's got all the little ribbon and everything. That rule wasn't in effect until December 29, 1997.
What?
Okay, not on February 10th, 1996. And here they're telling, and when I say they, the defendants that are supported by the Nevada Attorney General's office, the biggest people in Nevada, they're telling the federal judge, because it's a federal case, that Tommy violated NAC 467.027 section 3. And so I'm going back to the judge saying, Judge, wait, it didn't exist on that date. How could he have violated a rule that didn't exist? Plus, how could they tell you, Judge, that he's violating a rule and you're accepting this retroactive when it didn't exist? So guess what? The judge closes the case based on statute of limitations. But by then...
Sorry, what does that mean?
That meant that was the end of the case. So, yeah, and this case lasted 10 years. It went from federal court, Nevada, to the Ninth Circuit, San Francisco, to the Supreme Court, back again to federal Ninth Circuit Court, Supreme Court. But you know what? At the end of the 10-year lawsuit, I had the answers for Tommy. Tommy, you didn't have HIV, you didn't have AIDS, and that's been provided by scientific evidence. Even the CDC and the FDA are involved in this case by providing me the scientific evidence that you can test false positive because you've got this and this and this. Even the FDA provided something that the test that they supposedly gave in 1996, guess what, gets pulled in 2014 because it's not really 100% reliable. And your license was never suspended, and the rule never existed, and there was not one physician that diagnosed you with HIV in Vegas, and there are no test results in Tulsa. Tommy, you're exonerated. Now I've got to get it out to the public and the media or in a story.
Which brings us to the I Am Tommy Morrison documentary coming out next year. Do you have a date for when it's released?
Not a date yet. No, we're still, I've got a fantastic film crew. They're actually based out of the UK, and the producer has a huge heart. He is really delving into it. We've got some absolutely amazing people, part of I Am Tommy Morrison. And it's the biggest story in boxing. It's the biggest boxing blunder in the history of boxing.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
It's by far and away I'm staggered with what you've told me. I'm staggered with how it's been dealt with all these years. But good on you for fighting the fight. Good on you for keeping the faith in Tommy.
Yeah.
Because
a lot of people should have stood by him that didn't stand by him. And I think a lot of people are realizing that now. but he deserves respect again. He deserves love again. He deserves the true story to come out, and it's coming out, which I'm very grateful for. You know, the mainstream media, they've had their time, and like you said, are they embarrassed? I think if they come out with a story showing that they had printed Tommy Morrison was diagnosed with HIV, and then 20 years later they come out with a story, oops, we made a mistake. Yeah, I'd be pretty embarrassed. There's some companies now that are coming out with the true story. Why would you leave out a postmortem? Why would you do that?
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. You've just hit the nail on the head, in my opinion. Everybody, the mainstream media, but his fans, the boxing public, they need to remember Tommy for his achievements.
Yes.
Not for hearsay, not for fake truths, not for what somebody did wrong, but for what he achieved.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the last word before we close the interview out. Tell me, after everything that's gone on all these years, what do you want people to remember Tommy for?
He needs to be remembered, like you had said, for his boxing career, also for the nice human being he was. He had such a great sense of humor. Just to give you one quick story before we end this, is we went to the Hall of Fame in Canastota. He was invited as a guest. And one of the trips we went to was a little signing, and then everybody got back in the minivan, and Angelo Dundee was in our minivan, and Tommy had brought with him what's called a poo-poo cushion. I don't know if you know what those are. You blow them up,
Yeah,
and you put them underneath somebody's seat, and when they sit on there, right, it goes right. Yeah, a farting noise,
yeah.
right? As Ray Mercer would say, that he farted in the ring every time Tommy would knock him out. But anyway, Tommy said, "You know what? I'm going to use this week." And I said, "Okay." And he blew up this poo-poo cushion, and he got in the van, and he placed it underneath him. Right? He said, "Trisha, don't worry." And he sat on there, and there was 8 people in this van, so you could really hear it. And he sits down there, and he has this very innocent face. And Angelo Dundee is looking around and going, "Oh my God, who was that?" And Tommy's just sitting there, innocent. But he just had so many jokes and tricks up his sleeve. That was one thing that we definitely kept in our relationship, was humor. Jerry Cooney, he had an interview with Jerry Cooney, and after the interview, during the interview, Jerry Cooney had said, "Oh, you should have done more training. Women weaken knees, Tommy." And I looked at Tommy and I said, "What does women weaken knees mean?" And Tommy looked at me and said, "I'll tell you later." But Jerry Cooney would say, "Turn the page, Tommy. Forget about this HIV thing. Just turn the page." And every day, Tommy would look at me and he'd go, "How can anybody turn the page? When you've been told you're going to die, your life is ruined. You lose your first marriage, you lose your second marriage, you lose your whole career, you lose everything. You're treated like a leper. And Jerry Cooney wants me to turn the page." He said, "I can't do that." So Tommy needs his respect, not just from his fans and the public, but from the media and from the boxing community. And that's starting to happen. And it's happening in I Am Tommy Morrison. And he always used to say, there are certain rules for other people, and then there are certain rules for I Am Tommy Morrison. And that's where the title comes from.
Well, I can't wait for it to come out. I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see who's in it. Just one more thing that I've just remembered before we go.
Yeah.
I understand Tommy loved the UK, and
Yes.
he was partial to a couple of our little treats. One of them being Twiglets, and also Bisto gravy. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. My mother would send out little Red Cross packets to us. And the first time I met Tommy, I said, "You're not going to like this, but these are Twiglets." And I had to explain to him what they were. And they came in little packets. And by the time I got home, he had eaten them all. Right? He said, "These Twiglets are fantastic." And so he always had my mum order these Twiglets. And then I would cook in the evenings, and then he would cook too. And so I got the Bisto gravy out, and I loved Bisto gravy. And in fact, he really loved it too. He'd call it, "Hey, can I have some more of that brown stuff?" But he loved Bisto gravy and Twiglets. He loved the Brits. And there was a time where he turned around to me and he said, "I don't want to be Tommy Morrison anymore. I want to have a British passport and I want to take your last name." He said, "I'm sick and tired of being Tommy Morrison." So he really wanted, he loved the Brits and the British fans. He said they had always been nice to him. He was also in an interview with Steve Bunce. I think you know him, do you? Yeah. And Steve Bunce had interviewed him. This was back, I think, in 2011. And after the interview, Tommy turned around to me and he said, "I can't believe it. I think I did half that interview in a British accent, Trisha. I'm starting to get a British accent." Yeah.
Trisha, it's been an absolute privilege talking to you. Thank you so much for opening the door and letting us into Tommy's world, giving us some truths. The boxing world need it, the media need it, and his fans need it. I can't wait for the documentary to come out. For now, we'll say goodbye, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for remembering Tommy. I know he appreciates it.
Take care.
Bye.